Life for girls in ancient Rome was defined by one overwhelming reality: control. From the moment a child was born, her future was not her own. The authority of the paterfamilias, the father of the household, was absolute and under Roman law. He held the power of life and death over every member of his family. Sons had some hope of freedom as they matured, but daughters, from infancy to adulthood, remained bound to the will of the men who controlled them. The first moment of decision for a Roman girl came at birth. Infanticide was a common practice in the empire, and it was fathers who decided whether a newborn would live or die. Baby girls, seen as less valuable than boys, were often abandoned, left exposed to the elements, or sold into slavery. Those who survived did so because their fathers allowed them to, and that fact shaped the entire trajectory of their lives. From the very start, survival depended on obedience. Childhood for Roman girls was brief. Unlike boys, who might receive education in rhetoric, politics, or military skills, girls were usually taught skills that reinforced their expected roles as wives and mothers. Spinning wool, managing a household, learning proper modesty, and above all, preserving chastity. These were the pillars of a girl's upbringing. A Roman girl's body was not her own. It was considered the property of her family, a tool to forge alliances through marriage. By the age of 12, many girls were already married off, often to men far older than themselves. These marriages were not about love, but about politics, power, and property. Fathers arranged unions to strengthen alliances, improve social standing, or consolidate wealth. For the girl, there was no choice, no voice, only submission. She left her childhood home and entered another household, where her husband and his family held the same authority her father once did. At 12 years old, still a child by modern standards, she was expected to bear children and manage adult responsibilities in a world that gave her no say in her own fate. The expectation of chastity before marriage and fidelity after was not simply a cultural preference. It was enforced through shame and sometimes brutal punishment. Girls were raised with the constant threat that their actions, even rumors about them, could bring dishonor to their families. A stain on a girl's reputation was not just her burden. It could ruin her father's honor and destroy her family standing. Because of this, fathers and husbands exercised strict control over every aspect of a girl's life. For those who defied expectations, willingly or unwillingly, the consequences were severe. A girl accused of adultery could face public humiliation, exile, or even death. Under Augustus' morality laws, women accused of sexual misconduct could be punished with confiscation of property or banishment to remote islands. Even when the state did not intervene, families themselves sometimes carried out harsh punishments in the name of honor. The control over women's sexuality was not just about personal morality. It was tied to the stability of Roman society, and so girls lived under constant surveillance. If life was harsh for freeborn girls, it was even worse for those enslaved. Enslaved girls had no rights, no protections, and no chance to escape the horrors that awaited them. They could be sold into domestic servitude, forced into backbreaking labor, or worse, exploited as concubines and prostitutes. Unlike their freeborn counterparts, enslaved girls had no legal recourse, no father's protection, and no hope of refusing their fate. Their bodies were commodities in the Roman economy, treated as property that could be traded, violated, or discarded. Conquered populations provided a steady supply of enslaved girls, and war only multiplied their suffering. Roman legions, after capturing cities, often separated women and children from their families. Young girls were taken as spoils of war, paraded as trophies in triumphal processions, and then sold in slave markets. Families were torn apart forever, and countless girls were absorbed into the Roman system of slavery, where they would spend their lives serving masters who had total power over them. For these girls, Rome's glory was built on their terror. Even for noble or wealthy girls, privilege offered little true safety. Wealth might grant better living conditions, silk dresses instead of wool, and tutors instead of mere household training. But the expectations remained the same: obedience, chastity, and marriage for political gain. A noble girl could be humiliated just as easily as a poor one if she defied her family, or if the emperor himself decided to use her as a pawn in his games of power. Honor and shame shaped every corner of a Roman girl's existence. Public punishments in Rome often carried an element of humiliation, meant not only to destroy the individual but to serve as a warning to others. Girls and women could be stripped and paraded, their dignity destroyed before the crowd. Executions, too, were sometimes deliberately humiliating, victims exposed, mocked, and treated as less than human before their deaths. For girls, whose worth in Roman society was tied to their chastity and reputation, such punishments were especially devastating. Religion offered little escape. The Vestal Virgins, the most sacred female role in Rome, were themselves bound by extreme restrictions, chosen as children. They were sworn to 30 years of chastity if they broke their vow. The punishment was burial alive. Even in the highest religious office for women, fear and death hung over them. For ordinary girls, the religious sphere reinforced the same expectations: purity, obedience, silence. For freeborn Roman girls, survival meant submission. For enslaved girls, survival meant endurance. In both cases, Rome's laws, customs, and punishments created a world where girls lived constantly under threat, not just of physical violence, but of humiliation, shame, and the erasure of their identities. Behind the marble temples and military triumphs of Rome was a reality of fear that shaped the lives of half its population from the very beginning. The silence imposed on Roman girls was not only social but legal. In Rome, women could not hold office, vote, or directly participate in political life. For girls growing up, this meant that their voices were trained out of public spaces. They were taught to listen, not to speak. Even in legal cases, girls and women could rarely testify freely, and if they did, their words carried less weight than those of men. This absence from decision-making made them dependent on fathers, brothers, or husbands in every matter of importance. Marriage was often described in Roman texts as a transfer of ownership from father to husband. Some legal systems allowed fathers to retain power even after their daughters were married. But in most cases, the new husband became the ultimate authority. The young girl's body was tied to her duty to produce heirs, and her value was measured by her fertility. In cases where women were infertile or failed to produce sons, they faced shame, abandonment, or divorce. For girls, the transition into womanhood was not liberation, but the tightening of chains. The fragility of their existence is clear in the many punishments reserved for girls and women who defied Rome's rigid expectations. Adulteresses, real or accused, were paraded in public disgrace, their hair cut, their bodies exposed to mockery. A girl from a wealthy family might be sent into exile, while one from a poorer household could face whippings or worse. These punishments were not always handed down by the state. Often, families themselves carried them out to preserve honor. In both cases, the message was the same: control of girls was essential to the stability of Rome. The constant threat of sexual violence also shaped the lives of Roman girls. Slave girls, in particular, were targets of exploitation. They could be forced into prostitution by their masters, sold to brothels, or used privately without consequence. For freeborn girls, the risk was not absent either. Soldiers in conquered territories, powerful men within Rome, and even emperors could act without restraint. Stories of emperors like Caligula and Tiberius reveal how power made even noble girls vulnerable to humiliation and abuse. Their families, bound by politics or fear, often could do nothing to protect them. What made life even more brutal was that suffering was often normalized, woven into the fabric of Roman society. Public games in the arena reminded everyone that pain and humiliation were entertainment. For girls, witnessing other women stripped, thrown to beasts, or executed reinforced the terrifying truth of their world. Their bodies could be made into a spectacle at any time. To survive, they learned obedience, silence, and endurance. But even these virtues offered no guarantees. Some glimpses of resistance do exist in Roman history. Girls who became Vestal virgins gained rare privileges, freedom from marriage, the ability to own property, and a respected position in society. Yet even here, the risk was severe. A single mistake meant a living burial. The paradox of the Vestals, both honored and threatened, captures perfectly the world Roman girls lived in. A system that gave them symbolic value while simultaneously keeping them powerless. The harsh reality extended into everyday life as well. Illness and death were common among children, and girls often received less medical care and nourishment than boys. Records suggest that daughters were more likely to be exposed as infants, highlighting the preference for sons in families, even when girls survived to adulthood. Childbirth remained one of the leading causes of death. For those married at 12 or 13, their bodies were often too young for the dangers of pregnancy, leading to fatal outcomes. Survival itself was an achievement for many Roman girls. And yet, despite the cruelty of their world, Roman girls sustained the empire in invisible ways. They kept households functioning. They raised future soldiers and senators, and they embodied the ideals of modesty and discipline that Rome demanded. Their suffering was woven into the very structure of Roman greatness. Every triumphal march, every new conquest, was shadowed by the cries of enslaved girls dragged from their homes. Every family alliance forged by marriage rested on the submission of young brides. Rome's glory was built not just on military power and engineering genius, but on the silent endurance of half its population. The story of Roman girls is not just one of oppression, but of survival in a system stacked against them. While men carved their names into history through conquest, politics, and monuments, the lives of girls reveal the human cost of empire. Their stories, often lost or silenced, remind us that Rome's civilization, celebrated for its progress, was also a place of unimaginable control, humiliation, and fear for those born female. Today, when we look back at ancient Rome, it is easy to be dazzled by the grandeur of its architecture, the brilliance of its law, and the scale of its empire. But behind the marble and gold was a society that treated its girls as property, as pawns, and as tools. Their suffering was hidden beneath the glory, but it was always there, shaping the lives of millions. The life of a girl in ancient Rome was not defined by freedom, but by survival. It was a world where control reigned supreme, where shame was used as a weapon, and where fear kept obedience alive. This dark history reminds us that every empire, no matter how celebrated, has its victims, and that often, the most vulnerable voices are the ones erased. If you found this story as haunting as it is revealing, make sure to subscribe to Torture's Room for more deep dives into the darkest chapters of human history. From forgotten punishments to infamous executions, we uncover the brutality hidden behind the pages of the past. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others fascinated by history's shadow side, and let us know in the comments which stories you want us to explore next. Because in understanding the cruelty of history, we can see not just how far we've come, but also how easily the darkest impulses of humanity can return.